Thank you for bearing with me last week. Christine, as you know, graduated, and then her sister decided to come in last minute, and I'm like, I don't have time to do all of these things, right? So it was just sort of, yeah, I appreciate it. So we're going to finish talking about Barman, and then in the upcoming weeks we'll look at two other confessions, and maybe a little less detail, because they're a little bit shorter too. But I want to start by having us do what we've been doing, which is actually, confess the confession. So we're going to confess the final two theses, 5 and 6. As we do, I'm going to ask you to, try to pay attention to what this might be saying in its context, right? So I'm going to give you a hint with one. If you look at thesis 6, right? After the Bible verses, it says, the church's commission upon which its freedom is founded consists in delivering the message of free grace of God to all people in Christ's stead, right? So think of that phrase, all people, in the context of this is a response to the German Christians who are trying to create a nationalist German church that's only for Germans, right? It's actually excluding people ethnically, like the Jews, right? So this doesn't seem to us like it's a bold statement, right? It's just, of course, it's for everybody, right? But in its context, it's actually purposefully worded to say those kinds of things, right? So let's read the whole thing, but again, pay attention to all those kinds of things, right? It's also worth pointing out these final two theses, right, are really about how we as Christians should serve God. Thesis 5 is about politics. It's about the relationship of the church and the state. And thesis 6 is about the relationship of Christians to non-Christians. It's about a mission, right? And the point is, these two tasks are intimately tied. Like, you actually can't pull them apart, which we do all the time. Right? We think the church is about, like, we're going to save people, and we don't get involved with politics. Right? But actually, they're intimately intertwined, and that's part of the point here. So let's confess, and then we'll talk about all of this. So first, fear God, honor the emperor. Scripture tells us, in the as yet unredeemed world in which the church also exists, the state by divine appointment, the task of providing for justice and peace. It fulfills this task by means of the threat and exercise of force, according to the measure of human judgment and human ability. The church acknowledges the benefit of this divine appointment in gratitude and reverence before Him. It calls to mind the kingdom of God, God's commandment and righteousness, and thereby the responsibility both of rulers and of the ruled. It trusts and obeys the power of the word by which God upholds all things. We reject the false doctrine as though the state, over and beyond its special commission, should and could become the single and totalitarian order of human life, thus fulfilling the church's vocation as well. We reject the false doctrine as though the church, over and beyond its special commission, should and could appropriate the characteristics, the tasks, and the dignity of the state, thus itself becoming an organ of the state. Lo, I am with you always, to the close of the age. The word of God is not fettered. The church's commission upon which its freedom is founded consists in delivering the message of free grace of God to all people in Christ's stead, and therefore in the ministry of His own word and work through sermon and sacrament. We reject the false doctrine as though the church, in human arrogance, could place the word and work of the Lord in service of any arbitrarily chosen desires, purposes, and plans. So what do we think? Heavy stuff, right? And wordy, but actually trying to be very precise and concise, right? So the one that I think always that stands out to me is that the state is divinely appointed, which I kind of want to take a step back with often and be like, really? Are you sure about that? And it fulfills its task by means of the threat and exercise of force. So this actually, it's affirming that that's what the state does. And we might want to say, I don't like this, right?
Well, that's why police carry weapons.
Well, this is part of it, right? Of like, they carry weapons, right? That's sometimes, this is saying that sometimes force may be the only option.
Police state.
Right? Go ahead.
I think there's fear God, honor.
Yes. So they're very good.
Fear, overwhelming power of
Yep.
God, honor. What do you think that's
Yep.
from government?
Right. So I mean that's that's a very important part, right? I mean, think of the other verses they could have pulled out here, right? The one that we're currently seeing all the time is Romans 13, right? Which is obey Caesar, right? And these kinds of things. Which they didn't pull that one out. They said, fear God, honor the emperor. So there's an order here. There's God, and then there's the emperor, right? If the state has power, it's because God has given it to it. Right? Not that it has power in its own right. Right? So we have in this country, we have the whole idea of a separation of a church and state, in which it's the idea that there are spheres that almost shouldn't touch. Right? But think about this in terms of European history. So what's behind some of this is the Reformation doctrine of the two kingdoms, where the reformers in the 16th century are saying there's the state and there's the church, and they both have different tasks. Right? This is long before, right, America and those particular ideas of democracy. Right? So what's the context of that? So think of the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. Right? There's no separation of church and state whatsoever. Right? The church was the state, right? And this is the issue. So, part of this is it's got that history behind it, right? I mean, the whole of the middle of Italy was the Vatican States, and the Pope was the emperor of those, and he had an army, and he went to war with other European countries on occasion, right? And if we get really into the 12th and 13th centuries, occasionally popes would go, well, I'm at war with France, but I'm also the head of a church in France. So I'm going to tell all my priests in France, no one gets communion until the French surrender. I will take grace away from you. Right? That's the kind of thing they could do, because it was that the church, in a certain sense, was the most powerful state. Right? So the Reformation is resisting this. This idea is here, but that idea can be deformed to the state does its own thing. It does the external laws, and a church is for your personal faith, and you're responsible to a church for your personal kind of faith, but you're responsible to the state and obeying the state, because that's where God is working to. Right? This is purposely not saying that, but this is how this gets read often. There were Ross, and then I think Bob wants in.
Is there also a difference between fear God, there is only one of them. The emperor is the office, not an individual.
Yep. So, there is again here a sense of, right, God has provided the state. What does it do? The state has a special task, according to this document. Divine appointment to providing for justice and peace, right? So, we want to unpack this a little bit. What is the state for? It's so there isn't chaos. And the real key in that first one is, Bob, I'll get to your point in just a second. This idea of in the as yet unredeemed world, right? The world is unredeemed. It's full of sin and sinners. There's going to be problems, right? There's always the risk that everything falls into chaos, So God provides the state to give us order and to do what? Promote justice and peace. Not power, by the way. Right? It's just to promote justice and peace. I think, Bob, you were next, and then Katie.
I'm racking my brain trying to think of Calvin's response to, Paul's statement about, the authorities being placed in power by God. And I don't know, maybe Dave knows Calvin pretty good too. But anyway, it was something like that if a ruler is not doing God's will, they weren't appointed by God. So, like I said,
Well, so, I mean,
remember the exact
whether it's Calvin or John Knox or Zwingli, all these reformers, like they're in the midst of all of this, of course, because oftentimes Calvin's a perfect example. He has to flee France because Protestantism for a while is illegal. And, they try to kill him. Right? So he's got to get out of there. And at that point, like you say, the state is wrong. Right? So there is a place when the state isn't fulfilling its task, the church is actually obligated to speak up and say, like, you're not doing your job. We're going to be critical of you. That's the relationship of the church and the state. Right? If a state is promoting justice and peace, the church doesn't need to talk about it. When it's not, the church is supposed to speak up, right? and call the state to do its task.
Because that's the task of the church.
That's the task of the church, right? The task of the church. So, one clear thing we can just establish, what's the task of the church? The task of the church is to point people to Jesus. It's the community that follows Jesus and calls everybody else to come be part of us and follow Jesus too, right? I think one of the key things in thesis 6 is it begins with, "Lo, I'm with you always," I'm used to saying to the end of the age, right, rather than to the close of the age. But why is that there? Well, the first thing they're telling us is Jesus isn't gone. He's here with us right now. He's the head of the church. He's the missionary, or if you want to think of this in that way. We point people to him. We follow him. Right? This isn't our task. We're not determining it on our own. Right? Go ahead, Dirk.
How does this play out in the United States and the world today?
Well, so this is why we're talking about this, obviously, right? Yeah, we're very diverse, right? But so, part of what is happening here is, right, what we might learn from this is if we think the state isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, we call it out.
We should.
Right? Or we should, right?
But because,
Yeah.
because we have so many denominations and so many independent churches, the message is not as clear.
Right. But think about what's happening here, right? This is a minority group in the church. So the history of this, a group that wrote this document comes to be called the Confessing Church, right? Which is basically a protest movement against the German Christians who have taken over the church. So again, it's a church. You have offices. People get elected to them, right? And so the church, in a sense, has been taken over by the Nazis. All the leaders now in the church are committed to Nazism. And one of the things that they're doing is to say that everything the church does needs to be step in step with the state. And in fact, if we aren't, then a church is at odds with a state, and it's a church that has fallen out of following God faithfully. We actually have theologians and pastors at this time saying God is working through the state. The church has to fully support everything the state is doing.
That is also happening here.
That's why I'm on there. To a degree, the difference is we don't have a church, right? In a sense, it's kind of harder for the government to sort of tell the churches what to do, because built into our government is this idea that the church and the state are separate.
So the Pope is speaking out.
Right. I mean, so one thing he's doing is saying like so notice what he's doing. In a sense, he's, I wish he'd do more, but he's, in a certain sense, he's very much staying in his lane, right? But he's saying what is happening here is unjust, or this does not promote peace. The current pope is pretty in step with this, right? So he's calling on the state to promote justice and peace. So get out of Iran and treat your people fairly, justly, right?
So there's nothing wrong with saying that,
Yeah.
in my mind.
Yeah.
It's respectful.
Yeah.
It's honest. It's his. So I think that fits into the honor the
Yeah.
emperor. It doesn't
Yeah.
say obey
Right.
the emperor. It says honor the
Yeah.
emperor. And to me, voicing that distaste or that disagreement in respectful
Yeah.
ways is appropriate.
Betty, you were first, and then over here.
What about people, what were they thinking about people that chose not to be in the church? Do they have a voice at all? If they're living there, they are part, have to respond to the government, but what if they decide, I don't want anything to do with the church?
Well, so in this era, the Nazi era, that would be perfectly fine. We actually, now that we have kind of all the internal documents, they wouldn't have known this at the time, but like the Nazi officials are actually talking about, we need to take over the church and then we're going to get rid of it.
Oh.
They actually want to return to some kind of like pagan, German religion, like Norse gods and power and these kinds of things, right? Oh yeah, I forgot Katie. I noticed that earlier. But just to finish that, right? That's kind of what they're doing. But like even right around the time this confession is read, we get what's it happens at a big sporting hall venue. A guy gets up and speaks and says, "We need to get rid of the Old Testament because it's so Jewish and it's got all this weird Jewish stuff in it. Let's get rid of it and let's write a German Old Testament and fit Jesus into that." Right? And that was actually the catalyst that caused a lot of these people who were kind of in the middle of the road, these centrists, to say, we're done. We got to go with this protest movement. Right? So if you think of someone like Martin Niemöller, he's famous for that poem, right? First they came for the communists, but I wasn't a communist, so I didn't do anything, right? He was very much a centrist who at this time was advocating for a church to just sort of be at peace with the Nazis and do its own thing. And when some of those kind of events happened, he went, no, we need to really stand up to this, and he gets on board. But like early on, he actually voted for Hitler the first time, right? So I think the context that we need to realize is, Germany lost World War I. We're in the middle of the Great Depression, and what's happening in Germany is way more severe than what happened here, right? And so we've got people who have been beaten. The economy is awful, right? And what we get is a strong man who says, "I'm going to fix everything."
Which
Sound familiar?
Behind the Marshall Plan that did not allow it to happen
Yep.
after the World
Yep.
War II.
But so this is right. This is the context that they're in, right? And so everybody's on board. He's overwhelmingly popular because he's going to fix everything. We're going to be great. Really, he ran on. I'm not trying to make that connection just to make the connection. Like that was what they were doing, right? And the church is on board largely, the populace, right? Germany's a very conservative culture. Hitler's calling them back to this. Like he's promoting the church all the time. So for the most part, the church leaders are on board until they realize how bad it is and what's really going on. But at that point, they're already in power, right? So to really get to your question, part of what they were doing was to say, we're going to take over every social institution and make them in line with the state. That includes the church, right? If there was some big atheist club, they'd have taken that over too, right? That was the goal. So Katie, and then
Yeah, I forgot you a long time ago. I'm sorry.
I'm having a bit of difficulty with what I'm seeing as a contradiction in terms.
Yep.
The second sentence, it fulfills this task by means of the threat and exercise of force.
Yep.
According to the measure of human judgment and human ability.
Yep.
Well, we know about human judgment.
Yes.
But then we reject the false doctrine, as though the state over and beyond its special commission should and could become the single and total, that word, order of human life, thus fulfilling the church's vocation as well. It seems that it's both ways in a way.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is trying to say that there are different domains or spheres, right? So if a church tries to address injustices by arresting people and using force, it's stepped out of its lane. That's the state's job, right? But the state does this for what reason? To promote peace and justice. So if the state isn't doing it for those reasons, the church is supposed to call the state out, right? So that's where I don't think it's a contradiction. I mean, it is saying like there's different roles here because we live in a fallen, unredeemed world.
Thank you, because I was just looking at it the way I don't usually look at things. These are all
Yeah. I mean, so one real quick, well, why don't you give us your point first?
Oh, that was the same sentence, that they're to fulfill the task, but there's the condition that it's according to the measure of human judgment.
Yep. So I mean, so that is conditioning it, right? It is a saying, right? God isn't like coming down and just sort of telling us what to do. And it is open to the idea we're going to make mistakes, right? But it's saying by the measure of human judgment and human ability. You know, a sense because God isn't speaking to the state the way he speaks to the church. Because the state is not the church. Right? So, I mean, this would apply. I mean, God has ordered a state to give us order and peace and justice in every country, whether it's a Christian country or not. Right? So the state is not the church. I mean, this is one of the things this is very key to say is the church and the state should not get mixed up, right? So if we look at the two projections, I mean, one of what's happening in the first one, these are really two sides of the same coin, right? In the first one, what's happening is a church has submitted to the state and basically been subsumed into it. It's now an organ or an instrument of the state. We reject the false doctrines as though the state, over and beyond its special commission, should and could become the single and totalitarian order of human life. Right? So there are other institutions in our society that help fulfill our lives that aren't the state. Right? If the government starts telling us what to do in our religion, in our art, we can keep going, right? That's a totalitarian state. It's controlling all of these things, right? This is saying no to that, in particular for the church. The church does not fall into step with the state. It's independent, it's free. So should the media, right? All of these sorts of things, right? But that's what the Nazis were trying to take over every society, every institution, to have them all be in lockstep with the state, right? And this is part of why they're against people who are ethnically Jewish working in the government, including the church, which is a state job, right? Because they don't fit the ideal, and they're going to bring in foreign elements, right? The idea is to have some kind of pure Aryan society.
Did they extend to universities as well?
Well, that they end up doing that. They end up firing anyone who's a Jewish employee, and they don't admit Jewish students. Because again, if it's a state university, this is to train people for our society. If they don't fit into our society, right? I mean, again, it's worth pointing out, I mean, we always focus on the fact that the Nazis killed 6 million Jews. They actually killed 18 million people in the concentration camps, right? And they went after, communists and gypsies and sexuals first, right?
And the educators.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, so anybody. I mean, again, education. So if you're a professor or a teacher and you're not defending the state and you're being critical of it, you lose your job. Because everything in society is to support the state.
Sounds really familiar.
Right? Yep. Right.
I just want to say that I think there is, I do see connections between Charlie Kirk's and you have people
Well, I mean, so what is Turning Point USA doing?
Agenda of Christian nationalism.
It's got an agenda of Christian nationalism, right, which is what trying to do. It's trying to say that the Christian faith is going to order American society, right? But that isn't a church taking over the estate. This is actually getting into the next rejection. It's the church stepping into the domain of the state and thereby becoming subsumed into the state. So in the first rejection, we're saying the church surrenders itself to the state. In the second one, the church is trying to become the state. And what it does, but in both cases, what happens is the church gets subsumed into the state. It becomes an instrument of the state, not something that can oppose it. Right?
I think is it Mrs. Erica Kirk?
I can barely hear you.
No, sorry.
Because this is going, I think his wife, Charlie Kirk's wife, Erica, is spoke beautifully. It's such a hard, I can't even imagine, a very difficult thing to do. Just this past week on NPR, whatever, I was hearing that it was having trouble finding its leadership or having trouble within the leadership doing its thing. But anyway,
but again, but I mean, what is these keeps trying to do, right? They're trying to actually promote that kind of a vision of the church. Of the church is going to be an instrument that's going to promote certain values for the benefit of certain people, right? So, and you begin excluding people, right? Because you've got this idea of right.
Yeah.
But again, it's actually trying to be. I mean, it's trying to create a church or a version of the Christian faith that's lockstep with Omega. Right. That supports those views.
They use the Bible like to support things like, old time like slavery.
Yep.
Keeping women in the kitchen.
Yep.
And other things.
Right. So I mean, one of the things I think the key is, again, what is the point of the state? The state is supposed to promote justice and peace, right? So again, I mean, this is where behind all this is all kinds of Reformation ideas. So we could go back to someone like Zwingli, who actually argues that the point of the state is to protect those who don't have a voice. So like a democracy, I mean, it's this setting up democratic values way back in the 16th century, right? But it isn't pure rule by the majority. The actual task of the state is to protect those who are weak, those who don't have a voice, to give them a seat at the table, right? Because it's supposed to be promoting justice and peace. So we lift up those who are oppressed, and we remove the conditions in which people are oppressed. That's justice and peace, right? When the state seeks power, especially for a particular group, it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, right? And of course, how does all this relate to the state? I mean, to the church, right? The church starts to seek power too, especially when it's on the decline.
So which was happening in Germany at this time. So if you know your history here, the 1920s in Germany were a lot like the 1960s here. And it was a period of kind of social revolution, right? I mean, in Germany in the 1920s, you're getting like homosexual groups publicly operating, which wouldn't have happened here in the 20s, but it was something. So it's kind of the same. All of these social norms and mores are in question. Church attendance is plummeting, right? And then you get the 30s, right? You get the Great Depression, right? And everything, the economy crashes, and people are saying, well, we should go back. We need to go back to the church, right? And Hitler comes and like is proclaiming all of those things, right? And so the church actually initially, a lot of people in the church saw him as an ally, right? He's going to help promote the church culturally. And there's still, even within the church before Hitler, there is this idea of German superiority. That was just kind of this idea that a lot of people had of, we're great. We've got this wonderful culture in terms of art and philosophy and theology, and we're the most educated people in the whole world. Which that, the last part of the time could have been true. The best universities in the world were in Germany, right? But their overall culture is in decline, right?
There was a proponent, and
right.
If you go to the musical fountain, also Sprach Zarathustra is actually the German, was to...
it's all about the German spirit and like how it's going to be great, and it's going to, right? It's going to have this influence in the whole world, right? So there's a reason why, right, all of this is happening, right? And again, the parallels to our time, I think, are pretty clear, right? So there's a reason why these kinds of things happen, right? So a church also seeks power, but when it does that, right, it's stepping out of its own domain and becoming an instrument of the state. Church's job is to point people to Jesus and not seek cultural power, right? To try to influence people into our way of thinking. It's not how we do this, right?
And they had the Germans had such a blow at the loss.
Yes. Yeah. I think let's stay with that idea for a second. Let's say what's currently happening in Iran blows up, right? And we have World War III, and Europe stays out of the conflict. China enters it on the side of Iran. There's a war, and we lose. Do you think a Republican will ever get elected again? No, right? The people of this country will not vote for losers. Right? It's just the way that it doesn't matter what they won't, right? Our culture would be crushed. We'd have an identity crisis if we lost a major conflict. Right, that's the question, right? Would we be able to survive? Would we have anything that would hold us together anymore? Other than once we're not the greatest country in the world, right?
Well, within this country, the Supreme Court recently has moved us back.
Well, so there's all those kinds of things, right? But again, this fits of let's go back to the past when we were great, right? But that's just my point of this is where they're at. So they're having this cultural crisis of identity, and their whole move. Hitler's call was let's go back to when we were great. Let's get back behind World War I and have a powerful army again, and restore all our institutions. And the way that we do this is to have cultural pride, right? So this explains all kinds of things. Think about the arts, right? He was very critical of anything we might call modern art. Called it a Jewish modern, right? Why? Because it doesn't fit with the German cultural identity. It's a foreign influence.
Right? That's why he because France was a very artistic center.
Well, there's that, but it's also it's close. France
France was kind of the driving force to punish Germany in World War I and like got all kinds of territory. So part of that is just revenge, right? But it's also to sort of say France is too open to foreigners, right? There's too many Jews, there's too many Africans, right? We want this pure culture, Ross. Deutschland über alles, right? Yeah. This is the national hymn is, a Germany over everyone. But this is the idea of we're going to be great and we're going to rule because we're the empire, right?
And Germany is actually a very new country to Europe.
Yeah.
Because it was 12 tribes.
Well, but there's all kinds of kingdoms, right, that come together. It really isn't until 1870 that it's a unified country, right? But Chancellor Bismarck builds it into a very powerful nation that's got influence all over the whole world, right? And the loss of World War I was a huge blow.
Everybody was looking to get reparations from that.
Right. Well, they did. They made Germany pay for the whole war, World War I.
And Bismarck could have stopped it, except for the fact that he was growing old.
Yeah.
Losing his memory,
Yeah.
which is something similar.
Yeah. Right. But this is the point, right? We've got a state that is trying to take over everything, and so this movement is saying, we need to say no. The church needs to speak up and say, stay in your lane. One, you can't take over every institution. It's not your job. It's actually saying the role of the state is incredibly limited. Its task is to promote justice and peace. Right? And so even think about a war. Why would you go to war? Well, if someone else is doing something that is against justice and peace, you can stop them. Right? But you don't go to a war to gain power for yourself. Right? The police don't operate in a way all our national forces don't do things other than to promote justice and peace. Right? This is when the church is supposed to speak up, right? If we look at the other thesis 6, right? So the church's commission. So now we get the church's task upon which its freedom is founded, right? So if we go back above, a church is free from the state. It's not a state institution, right? But the church is only free if it does its task. If it starts doing other tasks, it's not free anymore. It's been subsumed, right? So the church's task consists in delivering the message of free grace of God to all people in Christ's stead, and therefore in the ministry of his own word and work through sermon and sacrament. So the church doesn't have its own ministry. It fulfills Christ's work, right? That's what it does. It does not have its own opinions. The whole point of the church is to follow Jesus and to bring everybody else along, right? Offering it to them, not forcing them to be part of this, right? That's what it's supposed to do, right? So then what do we reject? We reject the false doctrine, as though the church in human arrogance could place the word and work of the Lord in service of any arbitrarily chosen desires, purposes, and plans, right? So when we, as the church, put our own goals, our own desires, purposes, and plans ahead of the gospel, we've stepped out of our lane, which the church does all the time. Right? We want power. We want influence. Right? And so we start telling other people that they need to do what we do, whether they're part of our community or not. Right? And he's saying no to this, right? But it's also a no in the context in which the Nazi movement is trying to take over the church to serve its plans, right? Which this is saying of anything other than following God's plan is arbitrarily chosen. Because it's really about power, right? Right?
Isn't it?
And again, I mean, it's saying things here pretty purposely. All people, so it's every nation and not just a German nation, right? In Christ's stead, we're following after him. It's free. There's nothing you can do to earn it, right? Which we always think of that in theological terms of, right? My personal holiness doesn't get me into God's good graces, but it also applies to my identity, right? And there are people at the time saying God has a special relationship with Germany, right? Just like people, there's lots of people that talk about America is special, right? God is somehow doing something special here. Every time that's uttered, the churches say, no, we're not. We're just one country among other countries. There's nothing special about us in God's eyes, right? But it's the truth, right? Right. So I mean, this is
Will you remind me when this was written?
It's the very beginning of 1934. Yep. So Hitler's been in power. Hitler's been in power for about a year, but they're really beginning to centralize everything, right? So
basically the writers of this knew what was coming up and were trying to...
Well, I mean, but things are already happening. So one of the first things, so again, because the state the state supports the church. This is just his historical feature, right? So technically, I mean, this is still the case in Germany. When you go to church, they don't pass around an offering plate. Because that's not how you give. You give when you fill out your tax forms. And the state actually takes your tithe or whatever you want to give out of your like, it's an annual thing, right? I'm a member of the Protestant church, or I'm a member of the Catholic. You literally check a box on your tax forms, and the state takes that money out of your paycheck and gives it to a church.
Like a national organization of the Protestant church?
Yeah, I mean, there's something kind of like, and then it gets distributed. So your pastor is getting paid by the state.
So really, the church and the state are one and the same?
Well, the state is an instrument of the church in this case, right? And so there are free churches, like there's a Methodist church in Germany, right? They're not part of the state system. So if you're there and you're part of the Methodist church, you fill out your tax form, you don't check a box, you say, I'm not part of a church, right? Or if you're a Jew, or if you're a Muslim, or you're an atheist, you don't check that box. And then you do have to give money. If you go to the Methodist church, they're going to pass an offering plate around. Because how else are they going to get money? Right? But the state church doesn't. I mean, that goes way back to like the Middle Ages, right? I mean, it's just the history of this, right? But that's my point, right? So when that happens, right, during this period, the Nazis pass a law that says anyone who doesn't have a certain percentage of Aryan ancestry can't be a state employee, because the purpose of the estate is to serve the German people. And a member of the church, a pastor of the church is a state employee technically. So a person with Jewish ethnicity can't serve in the church.
Even though they may be German.
Well, then, right. I mean, so if you know, so I mean, I'll make this personal. My dad's grandma was Jewish, fully, because my dad is a quarter Jewish, and I'm an eighth. My dad could not get a job in Nazi Germany. I could.
One generation.
Right, because he was a quarter Jewish, and an eighth was out of it. It'd be okay.
Well,
Right.
in this country, some Jews were only considered 3/5.
Right. I mean, it's right. Well, and actually, we really want to get into the history of that. The whole idea for the way the Nazis did what they did, they actually got it by coming and visiting the south of this country. Right. I mean, it's yep. But I mean, so this is actually this fact that they're actually telling people who are ethnically Jewish, but they're Christians, they can't serve in an office in a church, is what actually sparks a bunch of these people to say, we need to resist and write documents like this. That was so they were actually kind of okay, half of them, with the Jews being persecuted and treated like second-class citizens, until they couldn't work in the church. And they said, wait a minute, why is the state getting in our business of who's a pastor? That's not their role, right? They ought to have reacted much more strongly to other things, right? But again, most of the populace is just with the Nazis because things are so bad, right?
So that's the power of the Pope.
Well, I mean, the Pope can, I mean, we can get some powerful church people who speak out.
Oh, first they came.
Yeah. Well, and that's what, they kind of whittle it down, right? But that's the context of this, right? Is trying to say, like, these are the roles of the church in the state, and this is being violated, right? So this is part of this. What we're supposed to do now is to say, is the state stepping out of its lane and doing things other than promoting peace and justice? I hope we all say, yes, that's what's happening right now, right? And I think there's a couple of things that are worth pointing out, right? One, power is not bad. This isn't saying power is bad. Power is a fact of life, right? I mean, we confess that God is all-powerful. It's how that power is used. Power is supposed to be used to promote peace and justice. When it's not, we resist it. Now we can argue about whether something is peaceful and just, right? That's part of what we need to do. Dave?
Well, I guess thinking about it, surprises me that your confession doesn't try to define justice fairly precisely, because the tendency is always to look at justice as retribution rather than the use of power on behalf of power.
I think both in the context and so one of the things that was interesting when I was kind of preparing for this is I was reading some commentary from the time, and several of the German Christian theologians, they almost got what this document was saying better than the people who wrote it. So they're really critical of it, because what it is doing is saying justice isn't promotion of German values. It's protection of those who don't have a voice, was how the German Christians read it. I mean, they actually read it intentionally as saying, what we're doing is wrong. And they got angry about it. Because we actually get all these people at the time who were saying, like, this is what God is doing. God is standing up for the German identity and promoting it. Right? And we need space to grow. And we need to get rid of all these undesirables. Right? So purge ourselves of the people who don't fit our culture, and then seek to expand both power and physically. Right? So whether it's Austria or Greenland, which you pick, right? There was a hand somewhere, I think Doug.
It's interesting. I go back to 5. The first words that were said.
Yep.
Fear God, honor the emperor.
Yep.
I think it should be said, worship God, not the emperor.
Well, but this is just quoting the Bible. I mean, it's just a Bible verse, right? So they can't change it. But I mean, the whole idea of fear. I mean, what's fear? This isn't like tremble in fear in the corner. It's rather recognize who God is. I mean, in a certain sense, God has all the power. Who's put the state in place? God has, right? But human beings screw everything up because we're sinners, and so we there also has to be a force that is calling the state to task and saying, do what you're supposed to be doing. In this case, that's a church's role, right? But a church is, or most of it's actually getting intertwined with the state, right? And defending the state project rather than doing its own task, right? I mean, as soon as we say certain people are excluded from the church, right? We've crossed the line, right? Now, that doesn't mean we put them in power in the church, but everyone should be welcome to, receive the free gift of the gospel. We don't exclude, I mean, in this case, we don't exclude on a racial line, right? We can figure out what we need to think of that, right? Whether it's a sexual lines or a gender or whatever we're going to think about it. Okay, that's what I have.
Thank you.
Right.